dive in. This is on time for most people. Reese, this is an early start for you. But this is what on time looks like. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here. We got a lot to cover, so we're going to dive in. The topic for today is a bit of a deep dive into 6 actionable trends that we are seeing within the RevOps space that we are highly encouraging all of you to take advantage of. This webinar was initially actually targeted at our investor group, so different advisors, operating advisors, venture capitalists, private equity folks, so that they can better enable their portfolio companies and their RevOps teams to start actually leveraging some of these trends. So we're not going to be diving into high-level market analysis. We're going to be getting into the weeds a bit so that hopefully you can walk away with some meaningful next steps. We like for these to be lively. We like to, talk a little smack, have a little banter. So if you want to jump in, if you got any questions, if you disagree with anything, Reese came up with all the content. And if you like anything, I came up with all the content. So we're excited to dive in. We're going to do a brief intro to who we are for those of you that are new to us. We'll dive into the high level of these trends, and then we're going to get into each of these trends and essentially say, okay, what can you do about it? How can you take action on it? We will do live Q&A at the end, but if you've got a pressing question that can't wait, Reese loves to be interrupted because he tends to babble on a bit. Okay, in case you don't know, Domestique, we are a fractional RevOps agency based here in Denver and Boulder, Colorado. In May, we will have been around for 4 years, which is insane to think about. Reese is going to get into a bit of how we define revenue operations, but it is inclusive of all these skill sets here you see on the left: marketing operations, sales operations, revenue operations, customer success operations, technical system admin. The core sort of in-house team is about 10 people, and we've got another 30-ish, I think it's growing, group of contractors that are sort of across that entire customer journey. So we probably need to update that. We specialize in B2B companies. It's not always B2B. We do some B2C for sure, but the overwhelming majority is certainly B2B. Our sweet spot really is kind of in that 10 to 200 million range, but we've worked with, pre-revenue all the way through public companies. So that's our little shtick. A little bit about me. So I have been in this B2B SaaS space my entire career. I started off in demand gen and eventually got into marketing operations. And actually the first company that I worked at with Reese, he was more in the customer success operations side of things. And we both started to kind of work towards each other in the funnel because we were realizing in order for marketing to be successful, sales needs to be enabled and successful. And Reese was realizing in order for our customers to be, aligned and happy, sales needs to be selling the right things. We just both naturally sort of work towards the middle. And eventually we've worked together at a few companies now and eventually decided to start our own thing. So that's a little bit about me. Reese, you want to give your little spiel?
Yeah, I think very similar to Alex, like we get this from a lot of operators, like no one actually starts or gets into revenue operations because they started in it. So I landed in an ops role 15 years ago. It was a sales ops role, had a bunch of different ones, as Alex mentioned. Spent a tour duty in CS ops. And then I think the thing that Alex and I realized, and you'll see this kind of in our framework, is there's this healthy tension in different ops roles across that customer journey. And I think that is part of what's made us successful. And then Alex and I have kind of figured out this language of how we talk to one another. So that was kind of the baseline for how we get into RevOps. And, we'll quickly talk about it, but that's, how we define everything we do here at Domestique. As we think about RevOps, some of you have seen this because I see some familiar faces on the call, Rob, Sam, and Jim, and it's great to see you all. So when we think about RevOps, one of the ways that we like to describe it is that connective tissue across the customer journey, really. And I think one of the big mistakes a lot of companies make is they think that it is just a marketing and sales operations, right? No, when we think of it as truly kind of product marketing, BDR, sales, PS, CS support, all in alignment with finance. So truly that entire customer journey. Now, across that customer journey, we think there are 5 work streams, and the order of those work streams are very important. So the first is what we call strategy. This is your kind of go-to-market strategy. So this is everything from who's your ICP, are you an account-based marketing shop? Are you using a revenue methodology like a command message, Spice, MedPick? If your go-to-market strategy is not documented, doesn't exist. So Rob, I know we did a big customer journey mapping exercise with you, and that's part of to get all that strategy down kind of on piece of paper, right? So coming out of that strategy is the process, right? This is the day-to-day, whether you have 1 individual or 20 individuals, everybody's running the same playbook, right? BDR gets on a first phone call with a customer. What are the questions they're asking? Are they tied to a revenue methodology? How do they put it into the CRM? How do you hand off a close one deal from sales to CS? All those types of things. So you don't have a bunch of people doing different things. Everybody's running the same play. Third is tooling. It's intentionally third. This is not just your CRM, but the entire tech stack that touches your customer journey. And it should be set up based upon strategy and process. Shouldn't dictate strategy or process. Whenever we here at Domestique get into a technical engagement that's tooling related, we never touch the systems until we understand the strategy or process. Fourth is data. Data comes out of your tech stack. We believe 3 things about data. Only measure what you can make a decision around. You don't need 500,000 dashboards. You need the dashboards that you will make decisions around. We're going to talk about data here in today's conversation. 2, data's got to fly at the right altitude. So executives got to be at 60,000 feet. Alex and I are nerding out with some other operators. We may be more 6,000 feet. 3, data has to be presented in such a way where the end consumer of the data, executive, a BDR, a CS leader, actually understands what the data is trying to tell them without RevOps having explained it to them, and can then go make a decision around it. Last bucket is enablement. So data highlights your hotspots across your customer journey. You point enablement at it. We think of enablement as 1 is skills. How do you multi-thread? How do you have an executive conversation? Those types of things. 2 is tools. How do you use the tech stack to be more efficient, not less? And then 3 is what we call competition or market, right? How do you position yourself within an industry, like battle cards, pricing, objection handling, all that type of good stuff. So this is how we think about RevOps. It tends to be a lot broader than a lot of organizations, but you're going to see this kind of like layered throughout today's conversation here.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. With all that in mind, we're going to dive into 6 actionable trends. These are going to be fairly specific because one of the things that we're trying to do with this RevOps Masterclass series, I think this is number 8 now, which is crazy. One of the things that we're trying to do is make the takeaway something that you can actually go and take action on. We're trying not to just sit here and pontificate for the sake of doing it. We want to make this useful. So to kind of set the tone here, we pulled this slide from Gartner. We thought it was very telling. If you've been working in this space, and I think I recognize most of you on here, you have B2B go-to-market is hard, and it is just getting harder for a million reasons. Privacy and security issues are cracking down. It is harder for marketing to get their brand in front of their target audience. It is requiring more and more stakeholders to get buy-in. Getting that level of multi-threading it's getting difficult. This is sort of a standard, more enterprise buying cycle at a B2B company. And one of the things we're trying to do with our approach here is to make this digestible and to provide not necessarily hacks, but sort of proven recommendations that we've seen make this easier. So All right, the 6 trends that we're going to dive into: AI-driven revenue intelligence, unified data ecosystems. Like I mentioned, security and privacy, making marketing's lives a nightmare. Dynamic capacity planning, that's going to be an important conversation. Personalization at scale, I think this is a huge trend that is absolutely going to take off in 2025. And then refocusing on the customer lifecycle revenue. So, okay, let's dive in to start. So AI is obviously the big conversation that everyone is talking about. Everyone's trying to figure out how to take advantage of. AI is here. The tricky thing is everyone in our space, every tech vendor out there is claiming to have unlocked it. What we're cautioning is, don't go buy all the shiny objects from all these different tools. Big players like Salesforce and HubSpot have been and are. I mean, they just did a release today in beta that we're already taking advantage of. They're doing it constantly. Big players like Salesforce and HubSpot are rolling out native AI tools that you can already take advantage of. So a big recommendation here is to essentially follow the money, follow HubSpot, follow Salesforce, follow these big tools that are already rolling out native tools. You can crawl, walk, run into your utilization of how you leverage AI across your revenue teams. Everybody's already using ChatGPT for whatever your little hacks are, helping you write some emails, helping you brainstorm marketing campaign ideas. It's great. But within these tools, you can start to leverage it, and it'll start to highlight hotspots in your data and probably gaps in your tooling and therefore your process. So one specific example that we're recommending, because this is starting to be pretty proven now, is leaning on, this example is HubSpot, but Salesforce has a very similar version, leaning on this sort of revenue intelligence, right? So if you're doing your jobs right, you've got stage advancement criteria that is dialed across all of your sales pipelines. You can't move a deal into a new stage without having all this exit criteria in place. This sort of predictive analytics here that you're seeing on this screen takes that to a whole new level. It takes that to the next step, which is it's going to score your deals based on things like how long has that deal been in its current stage, how many times, if any, have the close date been pushed out, is the deal amount increasing or decreasing over time, things like that. So the recommendation here, good question. Let me do the recommendation first. So the recommendation here is to, if you're an investor, if you're an executive, is to ask your RevOps team or whoever is responsible for hosting whatever your version of a forecast meeting is, ask them to start to include this, whatever this predictive analysis version of it is in HubSpot and Salesforce. Start to include it. We've started doing that here internally. We've also started rolling this out with some of our clients, and we're seeing a fair amount of red essentially across the pipeline, which obviously isn't good, but it is highlighting process gaps that, again, if we're following our sort of strategy, process, tools, data enablement, we're identifying process gaps. We're coming up with technical solutions that is showing up in the data. We are then able to use that to re-enable the team. So we've already started using this and think everybody should. It's a good question, Alicia. Do we think tools like these? Reese, I'd love your take on this. It's a good question. I don't think features like this in HubSpot or Salesforce are close to that. I think HubSpot specifically, I think the big complaint is actually not its customization and its scalability. It is its analytics. So I do think that specifically for larger and larger companies, a specific analytics tool is going to be key. Now, ironically, one of our very next recommendation is actually going to get into this a little bit, which is talking about this sort of CDP unified customer data ecosystem. So I don't think features like this are going to replace the need for something like a Clary, at least not in the short term. Reese, I'd love your take.
Yeah, I agree with that. The interesting part is like I was actually having a conversation with somebody at Clary. We'll get you a copy of the deck. I was having a conversation with somebody at Clary several months ago. And the interesting thing is they made a comment to me, and I've heard this across several other vendors. The number one issue that Clary is having is they're actually trying to actually teach their customers how to actually have a forecasting meeting. And this gets exactly back into the RevOps framework we were talking about. You can have a world-class tool like a Clary, a HubSpot, Salesforce, whatever it is. But if you're not marrying that tool with the process, it doesn't matter that you have a Ferrari of a tool if you don't know how to drive it, right? So the Ferrari's in the garage, but you can't drive it. So thinking about this from an AI standpoint, like if you're not marrying AI with the existing processes that you're already using, it's not going to really matter at the end of the day. So yeah, 100% agree with that. So I think Alex pointed this out well. How do you take what you're doing today and starting to add in that AI and that crawl version of this? Cool. So Alex kind of alluded to this earlier. The funny part is like we're calling this unified data ecosystems. This, like, for a lack of a better word, is like, I know they're like the holy grail that everybody's talked about for years and years in B2B tech SaaS is like the CEO dashboard, right? And this is kind of that at the end of the day. What this really is how do you make data-driven decisions from data that you trust? One of the things we see at Domestique all the time is we get brought into engagements by CEOs, CROs, CMOs, like, hey, I want to be able to make all these data-driven decisions. And they're like, oh, can you just build a dashboard for me, right? And we always end up asking a bunch of kind of like infrastructure questions, right? Do you have life cycle stages? Do you have stage advancement criteria? How is your data flowing in the systems? Things like that, because like that's all the infrastructure you need to be able to have until you can kind of make these data-driven decisions. I think one of the big things here is you're seeing this trend of companies, they want to make this data-driven decisions. A lot of tech stacks are over bloated and overcomplicated, and people are thinking about how to streamline this. So what is the way that you can kind of streamline the tech and the data where you can get to a place where you have a kind of streamlined set of data that you trust? A couple of kind of like call outs here. Like, I think one of the major important parts here is like, I know we have a visual and example of like a customer data platform or, you know, a data warehouse, things like that. You need to acknowledge where your organization is at. We have a lot of companies who think they're in this quote unquote run state of, oh, we need a CDP and we're going to layer on a BI tool like Power BI or a Tableau or something like that. Vast majority of companies are not there, right? Like a lot of companies are very much in the crawl phase of like, hey, look, let's just get a single set of dashboards and reports in Salesforce or HubSpot just to be accurate and everybody knows where they're at and where they live. Like basic stuff like that. So depending on kind of where you're at in your maturity, you can start to answer questions. I think the second major call out is we think about kind of data-driven decisions in kind of like a maturity framework, right? We think about things like questions like, hey, what happened? So like backward looking questions. Like we also think about questions like, why did it happen? How to be able to say what happened and take that next step of critical thinking to say, okay, it happened because of A, B, and C here, so I can now make these types of decisions. And then kind of the holy grail from a maturity standpoint is like being able to answer questions like, what will happen? So as we think about like a data infrastructure, we're always thinking about it in this kind of crawl, walk, run. Where are you at in today's maturity? And how do we make sure that we can start to answer some of these questions? And we're always starting with, all right, if we're going to put together the CEO dashboard, let's start with the what did happen. All right, now that we've got that, we trust that, we're using it in our process. Let's move to the next one of like, what did happen and why did it happen? Alicia, you got a question?
I do, and I'm sorry, I'm not trying to
no.
this session. I have to drop in 10 minutes, but this is like really good content. When you're talking about a CDP platform, I think the challenge that I currently have is like we have all of this great information, but thinking about like the gain sites of the world and like really true customer success platforms, the issue I'm running into is like, we have this static information, or, you know, it's constantly updating. However, we're asking the CSMs to basically make updates just at a certain point in time versus capturing the business outcome of the customer and being able to track that. Like, how do you guys tackle that with customers who don't currently have a gain site or are not mature enough to have one?
This is a phenomenal question. And I think this layers back into what I was talking about in the crawl, walk, run. And what I mean by this is like, you have to acknowledge and like, just be honest with yourself, like where you are currently at in today. So like, let's, you know, a lot of customers, you know, we work with don't, you know, we're going to actually talk about this in one of the other trends of like overinvest in sales and marketing, and kind of like CS is like the, you know, the middle child, or, you know, whatever you want to kind of like, you know, whatever you want to say. And I apologize for all middle childs out there. But you know, it's essentially like, oh, we don't have a tool or anything like that. We just have the CRM. So like, what is the data that you're trying to capture, right? Is it something basic as like a health score, or is it time to value, right? Like, and I think you bring up a good point, which is like, what does the customer care about? And like, what's the basic version of data? And then how do you layer that into your process, right? Because this is not a tooling issue, right? This is a, what is your process? And then let's build that into the tools. And then once we built that in the tools, how can we start to think about reporting on that? So if you don't have a gain site or some of these other advanced kind of CS things, what's the basic version of it that you can do in your CRM? And then as you start to think about the walk, okay, we're going to bring in a gain site. What can we track in gain site? And then the run's like, all right, we're going to pull all this information together in a CDP. So now we can look at information from HubSpot, our marketing automation platform, Salesforce, our CRM, and Gainside, our customer, you know, our customer platform. Now, how do we start to think about this and visualize this as well? That answer your question, Alicia?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I think the only thing that's like somewhat missing, and I agree with you, it's not always a tooling issue. It's the Salesforce of the world or the CRMs where we're storing this information. Great to capture health, even great to capture static information around a business goal. How can we track the progression of that, right? Like, how do we know that what the CSMs are doing in between that time are actually improving that health score? We have these static customer plans that, you know, they're expected to update on a quarterly basis, but it's kind of useless information when we can't really tell in between how those actions are actually impacting the customer.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
So I would actually argue that that's an attribution issue.
Okay.
Which is certainly a marketing term and historically a marketing owned activity. But again, we think that RevOps should be across the entire customer journey. What we do, and actually one of the trends that we're going to get into here is this customer life cycle, right? So everybody does life cycle stages, you know, subscriber, lead, MQL, SQL, opportunity, customer. Great. Yeah. But what about once they sign? There needs to be a sort of customer lifecycle journey. I mean, it can be whatever you want, but yeah, onboarded, adopted, renewed, expanded, whatever your version of that is. The very tactical answer to do this is the same play that marketing and sales does to understand what activities are marketing and sales doing to move records through the funnel. It's the same thing.
Like a post-sales, stage journey.
Exactly. So come up with whatever the customer lifecycle stages are, and then there are attribution hacks that you can do within HubSpot, within Salesforce, within any of these tools that you don't need a big fancy tool for to understand. Okay, you know, Jack the CSM. He hosted, you know, XYZ meeting, presented this, it's logged as this type of touch point within the CRM. That is now going to influence the conversion of the overall customer from, you know, onboarded to adopted. Like there are very tactical ways that you can do this within a Salesforce. And it's actually just mimicking what marketing and sales are doing on the top of the funnel.
Just post-sales, yeah. Okay, thank you.
And one other thing I'll add here, and then we do need to kind of move on, is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And what I mean by that is like the vast majority of time when we get brought into like some sort of data engagement, you have some sort of CRO who's like, I want to be able to measure, or, you know, let's use a customer example, right? some sort of like CCO, right? Like I want to be able to measure when like customers go from onboarding to adopted on a full moon when, you know, it's the second Tuesday of the month and it snowed a foot and it's, you know, -2 degrees outside in Florida. And you're like, why are you looking at this? And the problem is then you're asking for all this data, whether it's automated or the CSMs are putting like data. One of our tenets about data, don't mistake, data is not good or bad. Too oftentimes people want to pay data in binaries, right? We see data on a spectrum. And the whole goal on the spectrum is how do you take it from where it is today and move it up, and do you trust the data enough to make decisions, right? And the way that data, you can get it in a way where you can make decisions is by having, you're not asking for the CSM to put in 72 different fields every time they talk to a customer. They update a couple of fields. And so they're regularly updating. So you're getting those regular updates, and then you've got your dashboard that you can look at.
Yeah. Thank you for taking the time. Appreciate it.
No, great questions. Love it.
Cool. Okay. We're gonna keep moving. We have a lot to cover. This one is not very sexy, but this one is like crushing go-to-market teams right now. And so we think we need to call it out. There have been a few recent privacy and security updates, specifically Apple's, they're calling it the Apple's Intelligent Tracking Protection, or their ITP. It is having a dramatic and immediate impact on marketing technology and marketing teams, whether you're on the demand gen side or not. It is making things like attribution, paid advertising, retargeting incredibly difficult. This isn't just on the sort of marketing analytics side. This is impacting things like deliverability. I mean, this is sort of across the board. Digital go-to-market activities at scale is just getting harder. And I'm sure whether it's crappy attribution data or low deliverability rates on your outbound sequences, you are feeling a version of this. The reason we have this sort of timeline slide in here is to articulate that this has been happening for a while. And like I said, I started my career in demand gen and sort of moved through marketing ops. This is just going to keep getting worse. Privacy and security are just going to keep becoming more and more of an issue that marketers have to contend with. And if we go back to that original Gartner slide, that spider web of, what the B2B buying cycle looks like, it becomes really important for you, the go-to-market operations, RevOps, marketing ops teams, to own your data. And what we mean by that specifically from an attribution perspective is you can't be relying on things like what your Google Analytics or what your HubSpot original source data is going to tell you, because it is going to continue to over-index on tagging things like direct traffic or offline. We just need to find ways to get around that. One way that we're going to get into in much more granular detail later on in the presentation is by having a very clear UTM strategy. I have to admit, I can't remember what UTM stands for. It's like some crazy acronym that doesn't have anything to do with what UTMs actually do. But UTMs, for those of you that don't know, are the way in which marketers can essentially tell browsers and different tools where their traffic is coming from. It's something that 9 out of 10 marketing teams get wrong, and it is becoming more and more crucial to be able to understand the ROI. Thank you. Yeah. Urchin. Yeah. Like, what is urchin? It doesn't make any sense. UTMs are becoming the bedrock of how you're going to be able to prove ROI on a digital marketing front. So this is just going to continue to get harder, whether you're using HubSpot or do we have any insights into how this is affecting Advance? It's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. We have a few clients that are using versions of that. again, I think clever use cases of UTMs are how most companies are getting around this. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing issues around, email open rates as well. I mean, even just recently over the last quarter, HubSpot has started to track and sort of tell you, here's your open rate, and then here's your open rate without bots, and then here's your open rate that we can actually prove, and it's just getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. I do think, I mean, if you go back to 2017 and just look at this timeline, for every security update, the major MarTech players and the browsers have made updates, right, to counteract this. So there will be a technical advancement in tools like in all these different tools. That being said, it's just getting harder, which is the punchline that I'm trying to drive here. So yes, I think those tools will continue to make improvements. I just can't overemphasize enough the importance of owning that actual attribution data, and that's where the UTMs come into play. It's a good question. Any other questions on?
Looks like there's a question from, and I apologize. How do you pronounce your?
Okay, it's Agya.
Agya. It's great to meet you, Agya.
Great to meet you as well. I had a good question on this. So I admittedly am pretty new to this space, and wanted to understand. So UTM links, my understand is that typically like a Meta, etc., they could do a world in which you click on their link and then they could track if 30 days later you come back and actually purchase, even if it's not through that link anymore. Are there UTMs like that common folk like us can use, or is that only a Meta thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that tactic is very useful in digital marketing campaigns, like retargeting campaigns. Yes, there are UTM best practices, and we could even put together a bit of a template workbook. We actually have one that we use here. I'm actually training our marketing intern now on how to use it. We can absolutely share that with you. The one call out though that I want to make is that specifically with this most recent Apple ITP update, so let's just use that example. Companies like Meta, Google AdWords, Bing ads, all these different digital advertising platforms, LinkedIn, retargeting, you used to be able to set the aperture to whatever window you want. So you're calling out 30 days, right? With this recent update, that window is getting forced to shrink down to like 7 days. So if Reese comes to Domestique website by clicking on a LinkedIn ad on, January 23rd, and then 8 days later, he comes back, the browser will treat Reese like a new visitor, which is an issue. And that's what's causing the issues.
Got it.
So again, there are like super advanced ways around all of that, but we think a very actionable hack around that is by using UTMs, storing that within whatever. I actually think you and I are going to chat today or tomorrow or something, and you're using HubSpot. So within HubSpot, being able to say, okay, Reese Williams originally came from paid social, LinkedIn, retargeting ad. Actually getting into one of our next topics is hyper-personalization and dynamic content. You, in theory, could render a dynamic piece of content, a dynamic web page to Reese that acknowledges, hey, Reese, welcome back, right? It gets a little advanced, but there are ways of combating this, but I wouldn't rely on a tool like Meta to be able to do this for you. Again, because Meta and Apple are obviously fighting.
Thank you so much.
That's a good question. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, boom. Reese.
Yes, love all the questions. And by the way, if there are any questions that we don't get into, Alex and I are big believers in kind of like paying it forward, because we had a lot of talented mentors early in our careers who did the same. So if you want to jump on a 30-minute, shoot the shit conversation where we can kind of brainstorm some stuff, we're always happy to do it. Capacity planning, and specifically dynamic capacity planning. What is capacity planning? This is essentially kind of setting your annual targets for the year based upon your annual goals for the year. So, the way that we see this is like, hey, what's our kind of big strategy for the year? Oh, hey, we're going to enter this new market. We're going to go up market. We're going to add outbound, things like that. How do you then codify this into a dynamic capacity plan? We've got a whole webinar on this if you're kind of interested, but we see lots of clients who run into classic mistakes about this. They don't start their capacity planning soon enough. They let the board decide what their targets should be instead of kind of like doing a top down plus bottoms up. They do a sales only capacity plan. They don't take into account any of the other teams that need to be on that. So marketing, BDR, sales, CS, all that type of good stuff. The best in class companies make sure that they have a dynamic capacity plan that they revisit on an ongoing basis. We typically recommend updating assumptions on a quarterly basis. The capacity plan has to be interconnected across all of the go-to-market teams. So if all of a sudden you're adding sales capacity, how does that affect how much pipeline you need to generate? Do you need to add additional BDRs? What is going to be the downstream impacts on our friends in CS? All that type of stuff. And you should look at what have you done. And when we talk about bottoms up, that's the kind of historical, what have we done over the last 6 months, 12 months, based upon assumptions. So there's everything from conversion rates, sales cycle velocities, all that type of stuff, in order to essentially say, is the top-down number, is what the board is asking us to do, is that achievable or not? Yeah. If everybody wants the cliff notes here, 9 times out of 10 it's not achievable. But the reason why this is so important, particularly thinking about this from whether it's, you're an investor and you're trying to make sure that your company hits the number, or your CEO making sure that you're trying to hit the number, is like, if you and the board are aligned on kind of what is that number, and you're setting targets that are aligned across each and every team, marketing, BDR, sales, CS, this sets you up for the best practices to be able to hit your annual number. We're going to get into some like how to actually go about that here in a few slides. But we're kind of moving quickly because Alex and I did the classic thing of wave our hands a lot and talk a lot up front. And then it's like, all right, now we got to get through 92 slides in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah. Cool. I'm going to move on unless anybody has any pressing questions. Okay. This one is near and dear to my heart again on the marketing upside. Hyper personalization at scale. I had a bunch of different content in here. And then late last night, I saw a post on LinkedIn from Sam Jacobs, the CEO of Pavilion, and I stole some of his copy here and pasted it in here. The future of go-to-market is here, and it is personal. I couldn't agree more with this. The ability to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time has always been sort of the gold standard, and it has been very difficult with tools like Clay that are out there now, and assuming you have a strong data infrastructure, it's achievable. You can do this now. So an example of this is when we come into working with a new client, we start to understand their different account segmentation and their market segmentation. They're talking at the level of North American enterprise versus mid-market in manufacturing. That's maybe with, companies of annual revenue between, a $250 million and $1 billion. Like that's the way that companies and therefore contacts and campaigns, inbound and outbound, get segmented. We're getting to the point to where instead a segment could be something like senior go-to-market executives, so VPs of marketing, VPs of sales, VPs of customer success, chief revenue officers, chief marketing officers, who are new to a job. So they just started their new job recently, but they come from a non-tech, non-SaaS background where they likely don't know all the vernacular. They don't know all the unit economics, of a B2B SaaS business. So they would be a good candidate for your product, which is, some sort of CRO school, right? And they're based in New York and they like watching football. Like, we can start to get to that level of segmentation. Again, it's easier said than done, but I encourage all of you to start thinking micro, start thinking personal about how you are running outbound sales campaigns, inbound marketing campaigns, how you're setting up dynamic content. This is, this screenshot here is hopefully a very tangible example of this. And it's actually the example that I was giving earlier about Reese visiting the website. Welcome, will you join us? Versus John, will you join us? Right? We're getting to the point to where we can start doing this at scale, and that conversion, that level of attention to the buyer is going to start to stand out. Again, going back to one of the very first slides, that spiderweb Gartner slide, B2B buyers, especially go-to-market executives and operators, they know all the tricks in the book. It's getting harder and harder to get them to convert. If you're speaking specifically to them, you have a much higher chance of converting them, whether it's through an inbound or through an outbound channel. Questions, comments? Boom. We're going to keep moving. If Alicia's still here, I think she's going to...
No, she left, unfortunately. She will love this slide. So funny part is we get brought into a ton of organizations on a regular basis, and it's always like, oh, hey, we want you to do this sales and marketing stuff. It's like, whoa, hang on a second. What about your customer success side? Customer acquisition costs, whether it's inbound, outbound, whatever it is, as Alex mentioned, is getting more expensive and more challenging on the new business side. But we see companies all the time fall in the trap of underinvesting in the customer side. And when we talk about like focusing on a customer revenue lifecycle, this is getting into some of the conversations I was having with Alicia, but like getting into specifics, like, have you mapped out what is your customer engagement strategy based upon segmentation? Meaning, okay, let's say that they have both an enterprise and a SMB. Like, is your SMB a one-to-many touch? As you think about those different life cycles that we were talking about of onboard, adopt, engage, renew, like, what are the different touch points in a one-to-many model versus, okay, we have an enterprise and it's a one-to-few model. Do we need to set up executive QBRs in the one-to-many? Understanding what those touch points are, I unequivocally tell you, if you have not done that, mapping that out and starting to roll that into your processes. Again, this is the process, and then you can layer it into the tech piece. You will see a positive impact on your net effective retention rates, not only your gross, dollar and unit retention, but also the net effective retention, about dollars you can expand and so on and so forth. We're going to get into more specifics about how to do this, but like the number one takeaway here is like everybody forgets the CS side, and there's often underinvestment in it. How do we kind of double down on the revenue you have by understanding what is the right plays, engagement strategy, and processes you need to run with your customers?
Boom. Love it. Okay. Those were the 6 trends that we chose to call out because they are actionable. You can implement all or one of those in your current go-to-market strategy today. You don't need a bunch of big fancy tools to go and do it. Again, we try to make this RevOps Masterclass series meaningful, something that you can take with you. So now we're going to get into each of those trends again, but specifically what you can do this quarter or this year to start to action on it. And we're going to move pretty quickly because we've got 14 minutes left. Cool. This one's me. So we talked quite a bit about this one at the top. Strong recommendation here is if you're struggling to find out how to leverage AI beyond just using ChatGPT to write your emails because you're too lazy to do it yourself, try to lean on whether it's HubSpot, Salesforce, Clary, whatever these forecasting tools are, implement this sort of predictive forecasting analysis. It is going to help you and highlight weaknesses within your sales process, like poor data hygiene, lack of follow through, deals getting pushed, lack of multi-threading, shrinking deal amounts, and Reese's least favorite thing in the world, a lack of adherence to stage advancement criteria. Although ironically, side note, in our HubSpot with our stage advancement criteria, he's notorious for skipping stages, moving things around, putting in placeholders.
I can't skip stages because we have it required.
Now, yeah, it's because we made you not an admin, so now you have to do it. It's been great. Okay, we're gonna keep moving.
One other call out on the AI piece, in addition to forecasting, lean into other things that you have available to you. You'll figure this out, right? So Google just released Gemini to a lot of people. How to use that for note taking, right? How do you start to think about like taking customer notes, putting in there? So like lean into other things you have in there. This is a crawl, walk, run approach. So
love it.
Cool. All right. Unified data systems. Big recommendation here is a couple things. We talked about kind of the maturity of like acknowledge where you're at. Hey, if you're ready for a CDP, awesome. Like you've already got alignment around what are all your stage definitions. You've got clean data going into the system. You got all these different technologies and you need to set up a CDP and then a BI tool on top. Fantastic. Go ahead and do that. However, most organizations, as we mentioned, are in much more that crawl phase of like, all right, let's just get a single set of dashboards that are aligned inside of the CRM. Couple of keys about a single set of dashboards here. The dashboards need to roll up from the IC level all the way to the executive level. And what I mean by that, it's like what the BDR, sales rep, CSM is looking at should eventually be the same data that the board is looking at. So if we're looking at MQLs or SALs, whatever filters we're using for reports in the IC reports needs to be the same filters at the executive and the board level. It shouldn't be a different set of reports. Second big takeaway here. Everybody needs to know where these reports exist. One of our big tenets is we roll out operating cadence, which is your meeting structure. In key meetings, link the report in the meeting. Like you understand what is going on here. Third major recommendation here is as you think about your process, what are the reports that need to show up in key processes, right? So I talked about the meetings and so on and so forth. If you have a demand council meeting or if you have a kind of RevOps readout or you have, during your ELT every week, what is the report that everybody is looking at and it's available so everybody knows where to go on this? All right.
This is one of the most simple recommendations, and yet it is one of the hardest to get right. But if you can get it right, you're going to save hours and weeks off your board prep time. Okay, we talked about this one quite a bit. We talked about the UTMs. Again, the recommendation here is deploy a scalable, reliable, KISS, keep it simple, stupid UTM strategy. I'm actually going to pivot a little bit. I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm going to just share our UTM template real quick and how this actually works. I'm going to be quick. And I can make a copy of this and share it with everybody, but essentially UTMs allow you to dictate what your CRM, what your database, what your source of truth is going to tag a contact with from a channel attribution perspective. So they've got all these different, definitions and terms on here, but I'll actually just show you. So for example, UTM campaign is one of the most common ones that you need to use. So this is how we do our campaign nomenclature. Fiscal year, fiscal quarter, month, campaign name, what's the channel, what's the medium, what's the asset type, and then it'll spit this out. The campaign that we're currently running on this webinar is this, State of RevOps. What it'll then do is you can go in and build out your tracking URL. So where are you trying to send traffic? So this is our conversion page right here. And then you've got your different pick lists. So UTM source. We've got all these different options here that we drive traffic through. UTM medium, things like paid social, direct traffic, referrals, social, email. What's that campaign? And then this is your tracking URL, right? And it will tell your browsers, your search engines, all these different analytics tools, the UTM source for this link is HubSpot, the medium is email marketing, and the campaign is this long-winded campaign. That then gets stored in your CRM on that contact record, and you're not relying on Google Analytics to tell you that, Reese came from this email marketing campaign. So again, I can't recommend that enough. I will send that template out if that didn't make sense. I'll come up with a cleaned up version of it and I'll send it over in the follow-up. But it allows you to own your data so you're not reliant on these other tools to tell you where your traffic is coming from.
And as I mentioned, if anybody has any questions, we're always happy to jump on a 30-minute call and walk through it. So
yeah, happy to walk through it.
Next one's capacity planning. We talked a lot about this. So as I mentioned, if you haven't done a capacity plan, I hate to break it to you, you're late to the party. You can still do one. I highly recommend you put together a capacity plan. Don't let the board just tell you what to do. You need to do it all. Go to market, marketing, BDR, sales, CS, capacity plan, and align that with the top down. Rob, I know we did that with you and your team just now, and it's one of the key meetings. What will happen, as I mentioned, more times than not, we see it all the time. We affectionately refer to it internally as the O-ship meeting, is the bottoms up, like what you've done historically, doesn't align with the top down expectations. That's okay. This is where you're allowed to kind of start to figure out, hey, what are the assumptions and the tactics we can take to try and close that gap? The next most important thing, if you're not doing this, the number one thing you can do in order to make sure you hit your number this year is set up some sort of reoccurring process to evaluate if you're on track or off track. We personally refer to it as demand council. It's a reoccurring weekly meeting, heads of sales, BDR, marketing, CS. You look at what you've done week over week, not just on a sales front, but MQL, SAL, SQL, by channel and pipeline source. And what it essentially tells you, are you on track or are you off track? If you're off track, is it a demand, conversion rate, sales cycle, or ASP thing? If it's one or a combination of those things, the whole meeting then becomes about what are we as a team going to do to address it? This meeting or process in general is the number one thing you can do to hit your annual targets. Hard stop. We've got lots of templates, happy to show people how to do capacity planning, chat about domain council, all that type of good stuff.
Awesome. All right, hyper-personalization at scale. If you don't have the budget for something like a Clay, right? A very tactical thing that you can do to take advantage of this is ensure within, again, whatever your CRM of choice is, you have some automated functionality that tags your contact records, your people records, your leads with a hyper-specific persona. That persona could be based on region, company size, industry, job title, job seniority, level of experience. Automate that. It's going to highlight gaps in your data, which is going to highlight gaps in your process, and then you can go and solve that with strategy and tooling later. But the idea is, if you can start to automate the tagging of, it's not just Reese Williams, it's Reese, the founder in Colorado of a small business who is obsessed with cycling and has terrible fashion sense. If you can get that level of personalization within your CRM, you can then curate either an outbound automated campaign to give him better wardrobe choices, or you can target him on an inbound side in just a much more personalized way. Clients, or our clients and companies out there that are doing this well, are winning more at the top of the funnel because their leads or their prospects are feeling seen and spoken to.
All right.
Last one.
Last one here. We talked about mapping out. So first thing you can do is, if you have not mapped out particularly the customer size, so as we think about this your engagement strategy, document it. If it doesn't live on a piece of paper or in PowerPoint, it doesn't exist. There's lots of executives like, oh yeah, I got it in my brain. It does not exist unless it's on a piece of paper. A couple other things: build out your customer lifecycle framework. So Alex kind of gave some examples of it. We have examples here internally, like and keep it simple, right? Onboard, adopt, engage, renew, expand, that type of stuff. And then what are the key activities inside of each of that? Other things you should think about, particularly on the customer side. Do you have some sort of health scoring? We're big fans of like a crawl, walk, run of this. Oftentimes people want to put 72 different attributes in there. Is like, keep it simple, right? Like, have they been engaging in the product? What was the last kind of vibes check? Things like that, where you can kind of keep it simple, but something where you can start to track that data. Other kind of important things. We see this kind of mistake all the time. Companies will roll out stage advancement criteria on the new business side, but won't do it on the expansion side. And what ends up happening is you're leaving money on the table, because classic, all of a sudden somebody says, hey, I'll purchase something else. So you create a deal and it close wins a day later, and your sales cycles look like a day on the expansion side. But if you're creating deals every time somebody might raise their hand, what you're going to see is you're going to see more deals that you can follow up on, same way that you follow up on pipeline reviews on the new business side. And I promise you will close more deals. Automated renewal creation process. If you're not doing this, unequivocally do it. Every time you close win, new deal, expansion deal, you should have the renewal deal based upon kind of the contract end date. Run kind of the same process. You will see a higher close rate on your renewals, which will have a positive impact on your net effective retention rate.
Boom. Okay. We made it. We're done. This is your walking around slide. If you take nothing else from here, these are the trends and these are the specific recommendations of how you can action them. You're going to send this to everybody after this. We're going to wait for the recording to render and we'll send it all over. But that's it. That's what we've got. Those are our 6 trends that we think any and all of you should be taking action on. It's certainly what we're focusing on with our clients, and we are seeing the results. So thank you for joining. I know we only have a minute left. We can go over by a few if anybody has any questions or wants to dive in. And like Reese has said, if there's a specific use case you want to get into, we're more than happy to jump on a working session and get into the weeds of any topic here. So any questions, any comments, any specific use cases that you want to get into?